Welcome to the Shudder. These two viewer accounts both came from Oregon and I thought were just fascinating. So turn out the lights, sit back, and I hope you enjoy. I always wondered if the old legends and fables of werewolves, vampires, trolls, and such had any merits. That is, till one morning, I came in from work and saw what was in my garden. I worked for a law firm as a clerk back then. We had been experiencing strange things around the house for a few months. Things like keys or the remote would come up missing regularly. I know that sounds normal, but I'm talking about setting the keys on the counter, losing them, and then finding them under the couch, or setting the remote down on the end table, and the next day finding it in the bathroom cabinet. We would hear strange knocks on the wall or rumbling in the attic. We'd go to look and find nothing. The most obvious thing was having vegetables taken from our garden. One tomato plant would be completely bare, while the others went untouched. Squash, peas, peppers, and cucumbers all had one or two plants completely bare, while the rest were full. I left for work early one morning, but had to return to pick up a file. I was only gone maybe 10 minutes. It was still dark out when I pulled into my driveway. My headlights shone on the side of the house where the garden was, and what I saw still baffles me. Standing there between the rows was a little person. Now when I say little person, I don't mean midget. I know that's not politically correct, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm only making the distinction. This little person was just over a foot tall, and it wore strange clothing, puffy and uneven, like animal skins, but colored. Green pants with a yellow shirt. It wore a little hat that looked like a sailor's hat. It was pushed back on its head, and it must have been male because it had a long red beard down to its chest. I only saw it for 2 or 3 seconds. When it saw my headlights, its eyes got really big, then turned and took off down the road with its arms loaded with veggies. It moved very fast, faster than any animal that size could, I think, but that was no animal. I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes, not knowing if I should get out. I finally got out, went into the house, and got my file. When I came out, the sun was starting to come up, and I felt okay to go look in the garden. When I got there, I could see tiny footprints. You really had to look to see them. If you didn't know any better, you'd never notice them. They were about 2.5 inches long, with a very thin heel, and only 4 toes. I told my husband what I had seen, and he insisted it was some kind of animal, but I knew better. I showed him the tracks, and he just stood there for a few minutes staring at them. Then he looked at me with a worried look on his face, but never said a word. The little person left us alone after that. The strange noises and missing things stopped, and the garden wasn't touched again. I know in my heart what I saw was real, and I will say, seeing that little person makes me wonder, what else could be real? Back in 1921, when I was a young girl of 13, we lived on a farm in East Texas. My mother and father were sharecroppers, and my sisters and I helped work the fields when we weren't in school. I was the middle child. My older sister Hazel was 14, my younger sister Grace was 11, and we all slept in the same bedroom but had separate beds. We worked in the fields every day except Sunday. We all had a regular routine. In the evening after supper, we would sit at the table and read by a coal oil lamp. When we were done, we would bathe, then prepare for bed. Grace was always the last in the room. She would walk in, put out the lamp, and get into bed. Working in the fields was hard, and Grace was always faking some illness to get out of it. Papa would fall for it every time, her being the baby and all. One day, we were helping pick cotton in the back field. Grace began to complain about a stomach ache, so Papa told her to go to the house and lay down on the couch, so she did. That evening, when we got to the house, Mama was standing in the doorway, crying and shaking. Dr. Morris was there with her. I knew something terrible had happened. Grace died, she said. Dr. Morris spoke up. She appeared to have acute appendicitis. It had ruptured, and she passed about the time I arrived. We were devastated. We had picked on her so much for faking, and now she was gone. The next day, we buried her and went back to the house to mourn for 2 days. That's just what we did back then. A week went by, and we hardly spoke, just worked and slept. The first night, Hazel and I did our usual reading. We finished and headed for bed. I took up Grace's usual duty, put out the lamp, and got into bed. The moon was up, and we could see well inside our room. Hazel and I lay across the room from one another on our side, just staring at each other. All of a sudden, the lamp lit back up. We both looked at one another, thinking the wick had not fully gone out. Then, before I could get up to put it out again, we heard the door open. We turned to look and saw Grace come in the room, close the door, put out the lamp as she always did, walk over to her bed, and just fade away. She looked solid and in full form, but had a pale blue, hazy look about her. We were both stunned in amazement. "Alice, did you see that? Was that Grace?" Hazel whispered. "Yes, I think so," I answered, knowing in that instant that she had seen the same thing I did. We stayed awake the rest of the night, talking about what we had witnessed and wondered if it would happen again, but it never did. We didn't tell Mama or Papa what we had seen for some 20 years. Mama told us she had seen Grace standing in the kitchen window around the same time with that same blue hazy look, but like us, didn't want to tell anyone. In all my years, I never witnessed anything like that again, but I always believed when people insisted they had seen a spirit. I just love that story. Well, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And I hope you join me next time for the Shudder.